It's official. If you're running a Titan Warrior build, this is the best warrior hands down to absolutely wreck the endgame. We're talking two-shotting extremely powerful high-level Pinnacle Bosses and running through fully juiced out tier 15, tier 16 maps, absolutely destroying everything on the screen with one click of a button, and easily one click clear the screen every time you see an enemy, and absolutely wreck endgame bosses for millions of damage per hit. Super easy. This is the Titan Warrior build for you, and I have to shout out Carnarius. I believe he's the original creator of this build, and his build planner is super detailed, linked in the description below so you can follow along with that. So I'm going to show you how the build works, how simple it is to set up, all of the gear, skills, and everything, but also some of the things that I struggled with so you won't have to. Nothing beats doing big damage on your warrior like the best sound. That's why this video is sponsored by Raycon. They sent me their newest model of Raycon's everyday earbuds and the charging case, which can actually charge wirelessly and has up to 32 hours of battery life. It almost never goes dead. They have an ergonomic design that is actually extremely comfortable. A lot of earbuds can hurt your ears, and as I've tested, these don't hurt after listening for long periods at a time. They also don't fall out of your ears no matter what you're doing. You're literally running, playing basketball, anything, it doesn't matter. They're not coming out. They also have some of the best noise cancellations, and they also give a 30-day money-back guarantee, meaning if you don't like them, send them back. And the earbuds actually have a quick charge function, which can give you 90 minutes of battery life for 10 minutes of charging. So if you're running behind trying to go to the gym, your headphones are dead, simply pop them in for 10 minutes, you should be good to go. I've used these earbuds multiple times a day, every day, for going to the gym and editing videos. I have other earbuds, but again, these are my go-to everyday earbuds from Raycon. Simply put them in your ear and twist, and you're locked in. Go to buyraycon.com/creativegaming to get 15% off the entire site. That's right, you'll get 15% off everything at Raycon's website when you use buyraycon.com/creativegaming. That link is also in the description below. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring today's video. So ideally, there's two levels to this build. So it's going to be kind of when you're starting to level up through maps. So first, let me show you how the build ideally works so you can make sure this is something that's fun for you or not. And PS, it's very fun. Ideally, we have a setup with Molten Blast. Again, that early mapping setup where you're using Molten Blast is in that build planner in Carnarius' setup. So ideally, we're going to be able to one-click clear the screen with Mace Strike. This is going to be our best one with Mace Strike. Then I'm going to go over in depth today, and that is using Mace Strike with Fire Armament, Primal Armament, Magnified Effect, and Martial Tempo. It's increasing our attack speed and our overall damage with those support gems, and this is going to allow us to really get a lot of overkills on enemies and allow us to explode many enemies at a time this way. We're also going to use Herald of Ash. This is going to give us overkill damage, which again is going to explode enemies, and we want Fire Mastery here just to one-up this to give us a little bit better of a boost. Then Perfect Strike. For Perfect Strike, ideally, once we actually go into a large boss fight, we're going to switch over our Fire Infusion and Primal Armament support gems so we get that extra damage buff, as well as Window of Opportunity. Window of Opportunity actually gives us a 25% shorter perfect timing window, but also deals 50% more damage when you get that perfect timing. And essentially, you have to get that perfect timing to deal the actual big damage. Otherwise, it's kind of trash. So you need to practice and make sure your timing's down. Timing that perfect timing as soon as your kind of weapon glows when you pull it back, you're going to be doing big damage this way. We also want Close Combat. This is going to give us 25% more attack damage, buffing our damage even more. And this is going to be within enemies of 1 meter of you, and it scales down with no bonus up to 3.5 meters. So basically, we're going to be right up in enemies' faces. Anyways, you want to get as close as possible. And when you do, as long as you're within 1 meter, you're going to be getting that extra damage. We also want Concentrated Effect. This gives us 40% more area damage, but 50% less area of effect. Now, one thing I do want to show you, if we take this off and we cast a skill, you can see it actually shoots out a little bit further, but again, we want to be as close as possible so our other gems give us the most damage. And then if we actually put that gem on and use it again, we really don't get affected that much on the area. If we're that far back anyways, we're not doing a lot of damage anyways because we're not triggering some of our support gems. So using Concentrated Effect, you get a free 40% damage this way. Next we want Infernal Cry. This is going to allow us to empower our skills, both our Mace Strike and our Perfect Strike. Now you can see here, you empowers the next melee attack you perform. We'll show you in the passive skills, you can get an additional attack, so that way you can get 2 empowered attacks straight in a row. And you also get 35% of damage as fire damage per 5 power of enemy in range, up to a huge damage bonus. So we're going to be buffed with this, especially against bosses constantly, so that we're dealing tons and tons of damage. You want premeditation here, so we get more empowered damage. We want raging cry, so we grant ourselves a bunch of free rage. And we want enraged war cries, so our supported war cries consume up to 10 rage, but we get an additional 30% bonus to our empowered attack. We want leap slam. Ideally, we want this with holy descent, overpower, and despoiler. This is going to be primarily a movement skill, but we can jump into packs this way. And when we stand in this, we actually regenerate 5% of maximum life per second and a 50% reduced effect of curses. So ideally, we can use this to jump into packs. It helps heal us and keep us a little bit safer. And then we can just start exploding everyone. Then we want shockwave totem. We're going to throw this down ideally when we're fighting bosses, because with Font of Rage, this allows us to get free rage regeneration without a lot of enemies around, meaning we're constantly building up rage, giving us more and more damage. Then we want Font of Blood. This is going to give us increased life regeneration per second. And then finally, we want Ancestral Urgency, which gives us increased 80% totem placement speed, so we can place our totem much quicker. We want to have Berserk activated. This is going to grant us 0.2% of physical attack leached as life per rage. And then we also want Cannibalism here, so 4% of life recovered on kill. Allows us to keep max health pretty much all the time when doing big AoE clears or mapping. And then we want Vitality, so we regenerate 1% of life per second. Now again, before I go into how all the damage works and how the damage buffs come up, because we're going to be doing a lot more damage than this when we swap some of our weapons in a little bit. The big things to keep in mind: have Berserk activated. You get huge life recovery from it. Make sure you have Herald of Ash activated. You get a bunch of explosion DPS from this. And then our main skills we're only going to be basically using is Mace Strike here. And the fifth, once you get to level 90, you're going to want to use Elemental Focus here so that we get even more damage. And then when we're using Perfect Strike, we're simply swapping our Fire Infusion gem and our Primal Armament gem down to Perfect Strike to buff that damage if we're going in again to a boss fight like a Pinnacle boss or a boss in mapping or anything specific like that. Now I want to talk about gear really quickly, and it's a little bit confusing. Now there's a lot of different gear out there, but I'm going to give you an idea really of kind of what works best. What I would first recommend is the DPS and damage you need to be doing really needs to be pretty decent as you begin to level up and start mapping higher level areas. It's always good to have your resistances maxed out and the best armor, obviously, but your DPS and your weapon is honestly kind of going to keep you alive more than like the super min-maxed armor, because you're able to kill enemies so quickly. The longer they're alive, the longer they can just absolutely wail on you. That being said, I'm going to show you my first mace here. Ideally, there's specific things we're looking for. We're looking for the increased physical damage percentage. Obviously, that's going to up our entire overall damage on the weapon. We also want increased elemental damage with attacks. You can see that there. This is one of the big ones. It really affects our DPS, especially when it converts to that elemental damage or fire damage in this build. You want that percent as high as possible. I would say aim for a weapon with over 100% elemental damage. That's going to really help you get a lot more DPS, even if you don't have a super maxed out physical damage set on your weapon. And again, you want to put Iron Runes in here to up our physical damage to make our DPS a little bit higher. Now, one other thing you really want to try and aim for is attack speed. I don't have attack speed on this weapon specifically. I do on this one down here. Now, I don't have attack speed on this weapon specifically, but the better attack speed you get, the more overall DPS you're going to be doing, especially with Mace Strike and Perfect Strike. So aim for that as well. If you aim for increased physical damage, elemental damage, any extra damage to up our DPS, like even adding physical, primarily fire damage, and then attack speed are the really good things you're primarily looking for. Now, I'm going to show you with this weapon one other thing we're looking for. So you can see this weapon has a decent amount of DPS. It has lightning damage. That lightning damage, again, the way our skills work, since it's lightning damage, it's treated kind of the same as physical damage, where it converts 75% of that to fire, and that's what our overall DPS is. So any damage type there is perfectly fine because it all converts to fire at the end of the day. But again, if you get fire, that's great because you get all 100% of that. You can see we have the increased physical damage again here, the increased elemental damage with attacks. You can see with the extra rune we have on it, we're getting a 158% increased elemental attack damage. That is insane. That's a huge buff for this build in terms of the damage we're doing. We also have that increased attack speed again, allowing us to do much more DPS over time. And the one thing I want to talk about, which is plus levels to all melee skills. Now, this one, I didn't have this weapon for a long time with plus to melee skills, but it actually ups your DPS by a tremendous amount. If you can see, if we put this over here and switch over our second set, we have plus to melee skills on both of these weapons, meaning just from these two weapons alone, we get plus 12 to our perfect strike and mace strike skills. Now right here, the way we have it set up, because we're switching back and forth, we get 26k right now with no other bonuses on our perfect strike. You can see if I swap this over here, we're now getting 14,000. That's almost half the damage. And if we put this weapon back over here on our second slot, we're then getting only 19,000 because we have plus 6 to levels with our full setup. But then again, if we swap back in our weapons, so we have plus 12 here, we're getting almost 27,000. So those plus levels to your melee skills are great for both perfect strike and mace strike. You can see ideally our first weapon swap is our mace strike setup, and our second one is our perfect strike setup. So you can see once we swap these gems back over to mace strike, we're going to be doing 39,000 damage. And you can see if we swap this other weapon with plus to melee skills, now we're doing 53,000. That is literally insane. So you need to make sure you also get plus to melee skills on your weapons, if possible, trying to have a fully maxed out huge DPS weapon. If I had that on this one too, we would be doing such massive damage. It is insane. Now, the one other thing I do want to mention about the weapons, and the reason I don't have that on this weapon and I'm not using this hammer because we'd be doing a lot more damage, is for the mace strike setup specifically to work, you need to be using a cultist great hammer. Why? Because the general passive gives us strikes deal splash damage to targets within 1.8 meters. Now how this works is that gives us our huge explosions, meaning we hit one enemy and they all deal splash damage to each other over and over and over again every single time you swing, allowing us to get one hit clears. Now this kind of weapon specifically is what causes that or allows that to happen, which is why I'm using this one and not my hammer. So if I had plus to melee skills on this as well in place of one of these other horrible stats like crit chance, we would be insanely in business. Now again, as you can see also in the build planner, when we swap over to our perfect strike setup and we get our gems set up, ideally you can have two weapons here and just swap back and forth. One of my weapons I swap manually because it's just way better. I spend a lot of time because the weapons are really important. But now we'll touch on some of the other gear. So for our chest, we're going to be wanting armor, as much armor as possible. You can see we have 1,600. You want to stack that to the moon so we can get the most physical resistance. You also want cold resistance and lightning resistance, or whatever resistances you need. Just make sure they're pretty close to 40 so that way you can max out your resistances easier. And you also want max life on here. The more, obviously, the better. Then for our helmet, we want, again, increased armor as much as possible for our physical resistance, max life, and strength. Strength is going to be a huge one for meeting our Giant's Blood requirements and giving us free health. And again, more max life. My max life on this helmet sucks. We also need 2 resistances, ideally on here. Cold and chaos is what I aimed for. For our amulet, this is going to be a very important one. We want the Zoph's Blood Amber Amulet. Now, this is going to give us 18% increased max life and 23% fire resistance, but it also gives us this passive, so enemies in your presence have fire exposure. That means if enemies are within 6 meters of us, they automatically get fire exposure. That means they automatically get negative 20% to their fire resistance. All of our damage is fire, so that gives us an insane amount of extra damage for free, and that's why this amulet is so OP. Make sure if you get one, you aim to get one that ideally is anointed. You can get one that's anointed with Titanic ideally, but again, aim for Titanic. And I also got it because somebody happened to corrupt it and get +9 to all elemental resistances. I saw that and couldn't resist for my resistance's sake. So now our rings, you're really going to want to stack resistances on your rings. As you can see, I pretty much have mine maxed out except for my chaos for the currently, because I'm working on replacing like 3 pieces of my gear. That should end up maxing that out. But you want to ideally stack resistances on your rings, meaning something like a fire resistance ring, so that way you get a huge free fire resistance on the passive of the ring. But again, increase to all elemental resistances is good. That's kind of what I did aim for in some of these cases. So increase to all elemental resistances, some element resistance on your passives. We want adds fire damage to attacks, maximum life, rarity. Carnarius' build doesn't have rarity, at least above over 20 on your ring, and strength are also good modifiers, and any other resistances you can get. Before I go over to the other ring, you can see if we get our mace strike set up here, that extra 25 to 37 fire damage may not seem like a lot, but if I take this off, our damage goes from basically 40k down to 36k. So it dropped 4,000 just from the ring. So just keep that in mind. It actually does make a pretty big difference. And then our other ring, you can see we went for the same things. Fire damage, we have chaos resistance on this ring. We have fire resistance and lightning resistance because we didn't need the all elemental. Again, strength, again, rarity and max life. Can't emphasize make sure you get rarity on the gear because playing without it sucks. And then finally, I'll go over the 3 pieces that I'm still working to replace, which are actually pretty bad. But we want to increase movement speed, armor on the boots to get as much armor as possible, strength and resistance. As you can see, we got lightning and chaos here. I would again aim for chaos on the boots specifically. You can see again, I have armor here, resistances, strength, max life, and flask life recovery rate. I currently don't have an ingenuity belt. Once you get to that point, you can afford one or find one from the Pinnacle boss, from the correct Pinnacle boss that you can farm it from. You want to make sure you put that belt on because as you can see on the screen, you get a huge amount of buffs, especially to your rings from it. And then our gloves, we want increased armor, again, as much armor as possible, max life, strength, and attack speed. Attack speed is going to be the huge one. You want a max attack speed if possible on your gloves. Now let's go over the passive tree. And by the way, I just haven't done it yet, so don't roast me. And we have it set up via weapon sets. Again, our first weapon set is to destroy people with Mace Strike, and our second weapon set is for mauling bosses with our Perfect Strike. Now, ideally, again, you can follow some of this stuff. Obviously, we just want to take as many strength nodes as we can. We want to take this increased armor early. And you can see for our weapon set 1, where we're using our Mace Strike, we're focusing primarily on the massive explosions that we're going to be doing with that splash damage. Now that splash damage with 1.8 meters actually gets boosted by this area of effect. For our first weapon set, we're going to be taking basically every single area of effect bump that we possibly can to make those explosions as big as possible. You can see also over here, this is also our weapon set 1, increased area of effect over and over and over again, making those explosions massive so that way we're able to reach multiple enemies. You can see we did the same thing up here, area of effect, and also down here we've done the exact same thing with more area of effect down here. The more area of effect you're stacking, the more those explosions and splash damage from our Cultist Great Hammer are going to help us to screen clear early. Now on top of that, we also want to make sure we're taking our armor again down here. We're just going to pass straight through this strength setup. Down here we also get increased armor again. We're going to take more armor down here. Come over here, we're going to take the node for your hits can't be evaded, and we're going to take some of the stuff for increased life and additional stun threshold so that way we keep from getting stunned at all. We have our additional increased damage per strength and strength bonuses here. And then we have Giant's Blood. And Giant's Blood again is going to make it so our weapon requirements have higher strength requirements, but we can wield 2 two-handed weapons instead of just 1. And then also our big one here is Avatar Fire, so that way 75% of our damage is converted to fire damage. Then once you pat down here, we have a couple nodes for increased fire damage and penetrating fire resistance. And then also 2 other important things down here is we path to increased attack speed. So you can see we got 8% increased attack speed there. You can take this extra 4 if you'd like, and 10% increased attack speed here. So that's basically a free 18% attack speed. Also, one of the things you're going to notice, especially if you get a weapon like this that requires 212 strength. So taking these attribute nodes, this 10% increased attribute node to give us 10% extra strength, and also should get you to that point where you can use that weapon. If you still can't use it, you might want to take this node that reduces the attribute requirements by 6%. That should hopefully allow you at that point to have enough strength to be able to use those if you need it. And again, there's another one here and another one here just in case you need to lower those requirements. Again, we also have some nodes up here that increase our rage and give us extra increased attack speed, basically 7, 7, and 12. So we get 26% increased attack speed if somebody hits us. And we also get 30% increased armor in case someone hits us. Feel free to also take this additional 30% if you need. But now really quick, I do want to go over our second weapon set. So you can see our second weapon set in green. We basically taken stuff that increases our melee damage at close range, increased overall attack damage. Down here, we took some empowered nodes, so we get additional damage for our empowered attacks. If you end up getting enough skill points, you can also path over here to these additional empowered attack damage nodes for even more empowered attack damage, as well as this increased attack damage right here. You can see down here we also took increased attack area damage. Again, we're just stacking as much damage as possible for our second weapon set because we're going to be using Perfect Strikes. Another one important thing I do want to also point out is you do want to make sure you have blood magic, especially because once you start using these weapons that have plus to level of all melee skills, some of your skills will start using a ton of mana and you won't have enough mana to use. So you want to make sure you have this and it converts all that to life costs, meaning it takes it straight out of your life, but that's perfectly fine because we're regenerating enough life. And now I do want to talk about our ascendancy points really quickly. We want the 4% increased strength here. We want the extra 20 inventory slots. We also want the extra strength again, and the 50% increased effect of small passive skills is a big one. Then we also want life regeneration and mysterious lineage, so we get that extra 15% of max life. That's huge. and these 2 armor nodes for 20% increased armor and 50% more armor from equipped. Eventually that should put us around probably about 80% armor, which is insane. And again, the more max life and strength you stack, the more life you're going to be getting. And once you get to around 5,000 or 6,000 and you have some of your resistances even up in the 80s and your armor capped at around maybe 80-85%, you should be pretty much invulnerable from a lot of things in the game. Now I do want to touch on jewels really quickly. Again, there's a ton of information on this in the guide, but I would recommend using one of these so you get damage taken recouped as life. You can see on this one we have increased armor, chance to ignite, and elemental damage. Ideally you want elemental damage and attack damage if you can get them on basically every spot. You can see down here we get increased armor. Again, we have elemental damage that's bumping our damage even more. Down here we have increased attack speed, increased elemental damage. If you could ideally get a setup, you'd want attack speed, elemental damage, attack damage, and then some other stat on there. That's going to put your DPS through the roof, but again, you want to go with what you need. So if you're finding you have a little trouble surviving, pick up some gems with some armor. You can get multiple with 20% armor. It bumps your armor up like 500, maybe even 1,000 depending on your setup every time. But you can also get much more rare and unique jewels as you go. And now I'll talk about how we play this ideally. And it's actually pretty simple once you have this set up. So once we go into a boss fight, we're going to make sure we have our weapon set up so that way in our second set when we swap to them, we have our plus level to melee skills if you have 2 weapons that have that. So that way we're bumping our damage up as much as possible. Perfect Strike is going to take both those gems from Mace Strike, and it's going to give us our highest DPS. Now, when we go into a boss fight, we're then going to jump in. We're then going to run in. As soon as we run in, we're going to place a totem. Now, while we're doing that is because, again, you can see these buffs up here for Font of Rage and Font of Blood, and we're constantly stacking our rage, meaning we're multiplying our damage. So as soon as we get to hit the enemy, we get to hit them for big damage. Now, ideally, if you get the chance, you can place the totem before that one runs out, so that way you can keep your rage constantly regenerating. And then right before we're able to hit the boss, we're going to want to cast our Infernal Cry. Now, this is going to allow us to, again, buff our damage to give us 2 empowered attacks at least based on this setup, meaning our next 2 attacks are empowered and going to deal a bunch of extra damage. So ideally, we're going to charge up our Perfect Strike, hit him with the Perfect Strike, and charge up one more, hit him again. And then at that point, we want to ideally try and keep a totem out. And then our Infernal Cry should be back up and running. And if you have buffs to your recovery speed on Infernal Cry, it should regen pretty quickly. So that way we can do 2 perfect strikes. 1, 2, throw out our totem, go back into our Infernal Cry, and go right back into it. And again, this is the setup for our Perfect Strike in the second weapon slot. Now, in the first weapon slot, we're going to swap our weapon back over here. Again, ideally, you want all of your elemental damage, physical damage, all those bonuses with melee skills if possible. So you want one of your highest DPS, basically weapons with that, with their melee skills on it in your first set. So ideally, if you need to, you can have a full second set that has all the weapons you need. But what I primarily do is swap this one weapon because otherwise you have to buy 4 weapons that can be very expensive. And again, for our second weapon, as long as you have a weapon that is a Cultist Great Hammer, your explosions will be fine. You just want to make sure you find one with all the good stats like elemental damage and stuff that you need. So you can see now our Perfect Strike went down to 14,000 because we're on this setup, because we're worried about clearing and not fighting a Pinnacle boss right now. We're going to swap our gems back over. Again, our Perfect Strike goes down to 9k, but our Mace Strike goes back up to 40,000. Again, keep in mind with this +6 levels to all melee skills, if this Cultist Great Hammer had that stat on it as well, we would be doing huge damage. As you can see, our Mace Strike goes up to 53k, but we need to have the Cultist Great Hammer for this to work. Simply all we're going to be doing is running around and jumping around with Leap Slam to move across the map quicker, jump into packs, do a Mace Strike on one enemy, and just watch them all. And if you don't have enough damage to clear all of them with one click, simply hold it down or attack them a couple more times. Everyone on the screen eventually should blow up, and that's as simple as the Mace Strike setup is. Keep in mind, again, Mace Strike, once you unlock that 5th slot at level 90, you want to put Elemental Focus there, but what you can do is put Elemental Focus and Fire Penetration in your Perfect Strike just to give you more damage for it, and then just swap these back and forth. That way, when you take gems out of one, you're not just completely ruining the other skill. Again, thanks to Carnarius, who I believe is the original build creator. Again, his build link is in the description. He's got a ton of information down below that's super helpful. That being said, if this helped you, drop a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out either of these Path of Exile videos.